Welcome to the first lecture of Bio 103. So lecture 1 consists of an overview of biology, science, and evolution. So what is biology? Biology is basically defined as the scientific study of life. So in order to be considered a true science, you should be able to employ what is termed the scientific method. So the scientific method involves a consistent series of steps that you can go about to investigate or to study a certain topic. So those steps involve simply observation. So you go out and you observe an organism, you observe an ecosystem, you observe organisms interacting with each other. From those observations, you should be able to develop a series of questions. These questions you will then attempt to answer using your hypotheses. So a hypothesis is simply an educated guess as to why you think something is happening. So these hypotheses are then used to develop your experiment. So you will carry out an experiment, you'll design it, you'll carry it out, you'll conduct it, you will collect samples, you will analyze those samples and results, and that will help you determine a specific conclusion. And when you conclude, you should be able to go back to your hypothesis and either accept or reject it. Now, anybody who knows anything about science knows that this is definitely not as simplified as it may appear in this slide or in your text. This is a very complex process that often involves you going around in circles, meaning that you might develop your hypotheses, start conducting your experiment, and realize that you're not measuring the right variables, or your experimental design may need to be revised. And so you are oftentimes going back to the beginning. Many times you end up with conclusions, and this leads you to a series of more questions and more hypotheses. So it's definitely not a linear, simplified process. So on this slide, we have all of the fundamental characteristics that must be present in order for something to be considered a life form. So life can be one or more cells. So you can have a life form that is unicellular, or you can have one that is multicellular like ourselves. All life requires energy, and this energy usually comes from the process of metabolism. So this cheetah, for instance, needs a high metabolism rate to be able to convert the nutrients that it acquires from its environment very quickly for it to be able to perform its functions. All life forms should be able to grow, whether that be in cell size or in the number of cells it has. All life forms should be able to respond to stimuli, like this Venus flytrap here. It can sense when a prey is present and close up the pod accordingly. We have this little seahorse here that can respond to its environment and can change its color in order to remain camouflaged. All life should be able to adapt. So if we take a look at the giraffe here, giraffes didn't always have such a long neck. In evolutionary history, their original body form was much more similar to a horse. However, as the vegetation increased, the length of the neck increased as well. So as vegetation increased, the individuals that were able to access the top of the trees and would gain access to these nutrients, and they were able to reproduce more successfully. And as a result, the length of the giraffe neck increased as a result of the increase in vegetation. And finally, all life forms should be able to reproduce. So you can actually organize all of the life on Earth. So starting with the broadest classification would be termed the biosphere. So the Earth itself would be considered our biosphere and all of the life that resides on it. Within a biosphere, you can divide it up into different ecosystems. And ecosystems are areas that share similar characteristics, similar life forms. So the desert, for instance, is a specific type of ecosystem. The marine environment would also be a type of ecosystem. Within an ecosystem, you will have different communities of different plants, invertebrates, vertebrates that interact with each other, and these together form the community. Within a community, you will have different populations. So you will have different plant species that may aggregate towards each other, and they form their own population. And a population is made up of individual organisms. Furthermore, these organisms can also be divided into different organs. So if you take a look within an organism, you will find different organs that will carry out a different function. For instance, we have this liver, which is an organ which helps to detoxify your bloodstream. So within that organ, you will have different types of tissues. So that's the next level of organization. So within a liver, you will have liver tissue, you will also have connective tissue, you will also have your blood vessels, etc. So within a tissue, you will have different types of cells. And so here is a histology slide of a section of liver. You will have hepatocytes, you will have bile duct cells, you will also have cells that form the epithelial lining of your arteries and veins. Within a cell, you will also have various organelles that will also carry out specific functions. So within a cell, you will have what is termed the mitochondrion, and the mitochondria is responsible for aerobic metabolism, so it will break down specific molecular compounds and will help to convert that into energy that can be used by the cell. And finally, you will have, if you take a look at these organelles, they will be structured with different types of molecules. And like you see the DNA molecule here, and that is a very important molecule for the cell. So if you take a look at the fundamental characteristics, we consider the cell to be the basic unit of life, which means that within a cell you will have all of those characteristics of life that I mentioned previously. So the cell theory was developed in 1839. It's been developed over years and contributed to over years, but if you look at the theory, it's still made up of three main tenets, and this is just to describe how cells are the basic unit. So all life is made up of cells, whether that be one cell or multiple cells. The cell is considered to be the basic fundamental unit of life. And finally, all cells come from pre-existing cells. So if you look at different sources, you may find different tenets. However, they all come back down to these three tenets. So if you take a look at cells and the basic information that is contained in them, cells contain their information in the form of what is called DNA. DNA is considered to be the genetic material of the cell. This basically contains all the instructions that the cell needs to form itself, the cellular structures, and to ultimately carry out its major function. So how this occurs is through what is termed the central dogma theory. And this states that DNA is used as a template to form RNA, which is then used to ultimately form a protein. So when we say that DNA contains the genetic material for the cell, what we mean is that the DNA contains the instruction to make a protein that will eventually form the structural components of the cell or form the components that will help the cell carry out its function. So if we take a look at life and where that energy is coming from and where that energy is going, there is a wide variety of mechanisms in which energy can be transferred from one form to another. And this energy flow through a system is used to have organisms move or grow, to have them reproduce, metabolize, and also for them to adapt to their environment. So if you take a look at the ecosystem function, all energy on Earth starts in the form of light energy that comes from the sun. Plants are adapted to convert that energy into chemical energy. And as higher organisms, we utilize that energy in the plants when we consume them. So when we consume plant material, we proceed to break that material down, extract the energy, the chemical energy from that, and that is used to drive other cellular processes. So during this process, there is a lot of energy that is going to be lost into the general ecosystem and into the vicinity. There's also going to be a lot of chemical cycling as well. So when there's chemicals that are going to be produced in the plant that are going to be consumed by the organisms. The organisms are also going to have a lot of waste material and byproducts. So this is going to fall into the environment, and decomposers, such as fungi, bacteria, etc., are going to be efficient at breaking those nutrients down and returning them back into the environment, specifically into the soil. And these materials are then going to be taken up once again by the plant. So if we take a look at life in general, there's many different interaction types that can occur. So if we take a look at the fine scale, cells will be able to interact with their environment, both at the cellular and at the tissue level. In this example here, you can see that there's pancreatic cells that secrete insulin that respond to the levels of glucose in your blood. So when you have a high glucose level in your blood, such as when you eat right after you eat a meal, your glucose levels will rise. This will be detected by these pancreatic cells, and in response, they will start secreting insulin, which will then be released into the bloodstream. The insulin will cause a response in cells in other areas of the body, and their cellular response will be to start uptaking this excess glucose. Glucose will be absorbed by these cells in various locations in the body, and the glucose level will then fall. As the glucose level falls, we have what's termed a negative feedback, and the insulin-producing cells will respond to this. They will detect that the glucose levels are falling, and in response, they will stop producing insulin. You can also have a variety of interactions at the organism level. So for instance, this tree here will interact with its environment. It will be absorbing light energy from the sun. It'll be exchanging gas. It'll be taking in carbon dioxide, releasing oxygen. This is going to provide oxygen to the many types of organisms that are in the vicinity. It's also going to be taking in water and minerals from the soil. There's going to be transpiration occurring, and as the tree ages, leaves and other material are going to fall back into the ground, which will then break down and provide excess nutrients back to the tree.